If you agree that no one should ever be silenced, broken, or discarded like they don't matter, then like and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reminder that even in the darkest hours, when a human life seems forgotten and small against the cruelty of men, sometimes the skies themselves open to bring justice. It didn't begin with the thunder of helicopters or the clash of weapons. No, it began with a discovery. An old storage unit cracked open after years of neglect, dust rolling out like smoke, the stale smell of time rising from within. Inside, beneath the junk and broken furniture, lay a small wooden box. Its hinges resisted, but when forced, it revealed not junk but a hidden truth. Medals of service most had never seen, ribbons worn by heroes of forgotten wars, and a folded letter signed by a general whose name carried weight in history books. Beneath that letter, there was another piece of paper, brittle and yellow, written not by a soldier, but by a young woman, her handwriting neat yet hurried, words spilling like blood from a wound. She had written it at 27 years old, her life compressed into lines of ink, pinned while she was being marched across the desert at gunpoint. And her words were not poetry, not speeches, not the kind you find in libraries or memorials. They were desperate confessions, the markings of someone who did not expect to survive. She described the tape across her mouth, how it tasted of chemicals and sweat, how it pulled at the corners of her lips every time she tried to breathe. She described the rifles pressed to her back, the laughter of men who treated her suffering like a sport, shoving her forward with every stumble. She wrote of the desert stretching endlessly ahead, the moon watching like a silent witness, cold and uncaring. But she also wrote of what had led her there. She hadn't been a soldier, hadn't trained in any camp or carried any weapon. She had been an aid worker, the kind of person who believed that showing up with food, medicine, and kindness could heal places that bullets had shattered. She had believed in people. She had believed in change. But belief doesn't stop men with guns, and on one humid night, they came for her. She never heard them until it was too late, their hands rough, their voices sharp, their orders carried out without hesitation. In an instant, she was bound, gagged, and shoved into the back of a truck that carried her away from everything familiar. Now, under the heavy weight of the desert night, she marched because they made her march. Every step blistered her feet, every grain of sand cut into her skin, every breath through her nose was a battle against suffocation. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the tape silenced her, the rope cut into her wrists until they bled, and the rifles reminded her that defiance could mean death before she even crossed that border. The men spoke casually, as though she wasn't there, talking about prices, about buyers, about the border as though it was just a line on a map where human lives could be exchanged like currency. She caught words she didn't understand, but she understood enough. She wasn't meant to see tomorrow. The desert wind howled, carrying whispers of coyotes in the distance, as if the earth itself knew what was being done here. She glanced up at the stars, countless and cold, and wondered if anyone back home was looking at the same sky. Would they know she was out here? Would they care? Or would her name become another whispered headline, forgotten after a week? Her heart pounded, but beneath the panic was a stubborn flicker of defiance. They had stolen her voice, but they couldn't steal her will. Somewhere deep inside, she clung to the belief that she would not end here. And what she did not know, what not even her captors knew, was that her disappearance had already set wheels in motion. Calls had been made, maps had been studied, coordinates had been fed into systems that did not forget. In places where shadows of conflict are, never far, there were men who did not leave their own behind, men who moved silently until the moment came to strike with thunder. Far above, in the cold vault of the night, rotors were already beginning to cut through the air. She couldn't hear them yet, not over the crunch of boots in the sand, not over the cruel chuckles of the men who believed they had won. But the sound was coming. The air was shifting. Her captors thought the border was theirs, that this desert was theirs, that she was theirs. They had no idea that within minutes, the skies would open, and justice would descend in a storm of black steel and relentless courage. But in this moment, this painful, endless march, all she knew was fear, exhaustion, and the cruel certainty that she was utterly alone, her fate sealed with tape across her lips. She was not supposed to still be alive. That thought circled her mind with every step, though muffled by the tape that chafed her lips and stung like fire. The desert was endless, its silence broken only by boots grinding against the earth and the occasional barked command of the men behind her. They shoved her if she slowed, prodded her with rifle barrels if she faltered, cursed when she tripped and scraped her knees against the jagged stones scattered across the path. She felt her body breaking, felt her legs screaming with exhaustion, but there was no pause, no rest, only forward. The border was ahead, though in her heart it felt less like a line and more like a grave. She could not speak, but she could remember, and memory became her only shield against the terror of the present. She remembered being 21, still fresh from university, full of plans and certainty. She had studied humanitarian aid because she believed the world could be better, that if one person stood where the world was cruelest, perhaps another life could be spared from ruin. Friends had laughed at her, told her to take the safer path, corporate jobs, easy money, the clean glow of city nights. But she had chosen differently. She had chosen to help. It was supposed to mean building clinics, teaching children, bringing water where there was none. And for a while, it had been. She remembered the laughter of the children, their bright eyes lit with gratitude. She remembered sitting by firelight with local families, listening to songs in languages she barely understood, feeling warmth and trust in places where the world said only violence lived. But that was before the men with guns had come, before she learned that sometimes kindness paints a target on your back. The captors didn't see her as human. She knew it in their eyes, in the way they spoke around her, not to her. She was property, a bargaining chip, a body to be traded for favors and profit. They laughed as though she was already gone, as though her life was worth nothing more than the price another man would pay. They had no fear. They believed no one would come. And why would anyone? She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't rich or powerful. She was just one woman, taken from a dusty road, swallowed by the dark, another name destined to fade. But what the men did not know, what she could not know, was that her disappearance had not gone unnoticed. The world was small now, smaller than these men realized. One voice back home had screamed her name. One message had slipped through the cracks of bureaucracy and landed where it mattered. And that message had ignited something. Far away, in a place where shadows of conflict were familiar, where maps were read with precision and missions were drawn in silence, her name had been spoken. Not as a victim, not as property, but as a life worth saving. The decision had been made. She would not be left behind. But here, on the march, none of that mattered to her yet. She only knew the pain. Her wrists burned from the ropes, raw and swollen. Her lips cracked beneath the tape, blood mingling with dust until she tasted iron and grit. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall, because she would not give them that satisfaction. The desert stretched on forever. The moon hung high, cold and pitiless, casting long shadows that made her captors look less like men and more like monsters. Their rifles glinted in the pale light, their laughter sharp, their cruelty casual. They spoke of her as though she wasn't even walking beside them, discussing which buyer would fetch the highest price, whether she'd last long enough to make it worthwhile. Every word made her stomach churn with rage and fear, but she had no voice to answer, no strength to resist. She was trapped in silence, her fate seemingly sealed. And yet, even in silence, her mind screamed. She thought of her family, their faces blurred by time, but still sharp in her heart. She thought of promises she had made to return, of dreams she had once carried. She thought of the children she had been teaching, their little hands clutching pencils she had given them, their smiles fragile but real. Would they ever know what happened to her? Would they ever learn that she vanished into the night, taken by men who saw no value in life? Her captors grew careless as the march dragged on. Perhaps they believed exhaustion had broken her spirit. Perhaps they were right. Her body was breaking. Every muscle trembled. Every step felt heavier than the last. She stumbled again, falling to her knees, sand grinding into her wounds. A kick to her ribs forced her up again, pain searing through her chest. But she rose, because there was no choice. She marched, step after step, breath after broken breath. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard something. A hum, a vibration in the air. But it was faint, drowned by the jeers of her captors. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of her mind born of desperation. The men stopped once, just once, to drink water. They did not offer her any. She licked at the tape on her lips, desperate for moisture, her tongue catching grains of dust instead. Her throat burned like fire, her body screaming for relief. One man noticed her stare at the water bottle and laughed, tilting it back to drink more, letting it drip down his chin as though mocking her thirst. They thought they owned her, and in that moment, maybe they did. But the world above them was shifting. The sound returned, this time louder, deeper, resonating through the still night. The captors glanced at each other, uncertain. They strained to listen. It was faint but growing. A low, distant rumble that did not belong to Wind or Coyote. She heard it too, though she didn't dare hope. Not yet. Not when hope had already betrayed her so many times. The men barked orders, shoved her forward faster. Fear flickered across their faces, brief and sharp. They knew that sound. They had heard it before. And it did not mean safety. It meant death. She staggered, her body trembling. But her heart pounded with something new. Something she hadn't felt since she was taken. A spark. A possibility. The sound grew louder, the air vibrating with its weight. She glanced upward, eyes wide, tears burning as she saw shadows shifting against the moonlight. At first, just dark shapes. Then, unmistakable. Helicopters. Black hawks. They swept across the sky like predators, blades tearing the silence into shreds. The desert exploded into chaos. Sand whipped up, blasting her skin as the downdraft roared. Her captors screamed, cursing, scrambling for control, their rifles raised in panic. She collapsed to her knees, shielding her face, heart racing, unable to believe it. Justice was descending from the skies. The desert turned into a storm. One moment, silence. The next, a furious roar as Black Hawks descended like shadows with teeth. The captors were shouting, their words lost under the thunder of rotor blades whipping the air into chaos. Sand blasted her skin, stinging her eyes until tears blurred everything. But she did not look away. She couldn't. She was seeing something she had thought she would never see again. Deliverance. Her knees buckled, not from weakness this time, but from shock. She could barely breathe as ropes uncoiled from the helicopters and dark figures slid down with precision. Their movements fast, clean, unstoppable. Marines. Their silhouettes were sharp against the night, their gear gleaming, their descent terrifying to anyone standing against them. Her captors tried to scatter, rifles raised in desperate defiance, but the Marines moved like a tide, sweeping the ground with deadly accuracy. Muzzles flashed. Orders barked. Men who had laughed moments ago were now screaming, diving into the sand, their confidence shredded by a force they could not match. She felt hands on her shoulders. Not rough this time, not cruel. A Marine crouched beside her, steady even as the storm raged. He pulled at the tape across her mouth, ripping it free with one swift motion. She gasped, her lungs dragging in air so sharp it burned. The gag was gone. For the first time in hours, she could breathe, though her throat screamed with dryness. She sobbed against the air, but no sound came out at first, just raw, broken gulps. The Marine's hand was firm, grounding. "You're safe now," he said, voice clear through the chaos. Words she had thought she would never hear. Behind them, the desert exploded with gunfire. Her captors fought, but the fight was brief, hopeless. These were men used to bullying the unarmed, not battling trained warriors descending from the skies. The crack of rifles, the thud of boots, the shouted commands. Every sound was a hammer, breaking apart the prison of fear that had held her. She watched through blurred vision as the men who had dragged her across the desert fell one by one, their arrogance crushed under the precision of justice. Some dropped their weapons and begged. Others tried to flee into the shadows, only to be dragged down by Marines who moved faster, who gave no mercy to predators. Time warped. Minutes stretched into forever. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would tear from her chest. The Marine cutting her bonds worked with calm efficiency, a knife flashing once before the rope fell away. Her wrists, raw and swollen, throbbed with sudden freedom. She lifted her trembling hands, staring at them as though they no longer belonged to her. She wanted to scream, to collapse, to run, but her body was locked between terror and disbelief. Then, silence. The gunfire ceased. The shouting faded. Only the steady thrum of helicopter blades remained. The dust began to settle, revealing what was left. Her captors lay sprawled, their rifles abandoned, their laughter silenced forever. Marines stood like statues, weapons lowered, scanning the horizon with discipline. The battlefield was no longer a march of cruelty. It was a field of salvation. She sobbed then, the sound ripping from her chest in a way she could not control. It was not weakness. It was release, a flood after too long held back. The Marine beside her shifted, pulling a canteen from his gear and pressing it into her shaking hands. Water spilled over her lips as she drank greedily, her throat raw but desperate for life. It wasn't just water. It was hope, tangible and cold and real. She coughed, choking slightly, but kept drinking until she could breathe again. Her rescuer crouched low, his helmet tilted as he looked her in the eye. "We've got you. You're going home." Home. The word stabbed at her heart, because she hadn't dared to think of home. She hadn't let herself believe she would ever see it again. She thought of her family, her friends, the children she had tried to help. The idea that she might walk among them again, might laugh and speak freely, it was too much. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing into the dirt, her body convulsing with the weight of it all. Strong arms lifted her, not with violence, but with care. She was cradled against body armor, her cheek pressed to the fabric rough with dust and sweat. She clung instinctively, her fingers knotting into the Marine's vest, as if letting go might mean falling back into hell. But there was no going back. He carried her toward the helicopter, where the rotors spun like wings, promising escape. She felt her feet leave the ground, felt her body move toward safety. Each step away from the desert was a step back into life. The Black Hawk loomed above, its shadow vast, its engines screaming with power. Marines lifted her inside, shielding her from the blast of air. She collapsed onto the floor, her body too weak to resist, her heart too full to speak. A medic knelt beside her, already tending to her wrists, her face, her ribs. Voices overlapped, professional and calm, the kind of calm that only comes from those who have stared death in the face and refused to blink. She let them work. She had nothing left but trust. As the helicopter lifted, she looked out through the open door. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, the borderline cutting across it like a scar. She saw the men who had marched her toward it now sprawled lifeless, their weapons useless in the sand. She saw the trail her feet had carved, the evidence of her suffering etched into the earth. And then, she saw it grow smaller, vanish beneath the rising aircraft. The desert that had been her tomb became nothing more than ground left behind. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of fear now, but of awe. She had thought she was forgotten. She had thought no one would come. And yet, from the sky, salvation had arrived. Not because she was powerful, not because she was special, but because her life mattered. It mattered enough for men to risk their own, to descend from the heavens and tear her free from the jaws of death. Her eyes closed as exhaustion finally claimed her. She fell into sleep, her body limp, her soul still trembling. But in that sleep, there was peace. For the first time since the night she was taken, she dreamed not of despair, but of tomorrow. And tomorrow did come. The Marines who carried her away would later say she had been unbreakable, that her spirit had not cracked even when her body had been pushed to its edge. The box that would one day be discovered, years later, would hold the letter she wrote, the one that somehow survived that night, folded and tucked into a pocket. And on that paper were words that no tape, no rope, no gun could erase. If you find this, know I was not afraid to live, even when I was afraid to die. And if you read this, know that I was not left behind, because she hadn't been. When the Black Hawks descended from the night sky, when Marines set boots on sand, when justice tore apart the silence of the desert, a truth was written into history. Even when evil marches you toward the border, even when you are silenced and broken, sometimes hope doesn't walk, it flies.